The drive into the Appalachia Mountains was supposed to be peaceful. I imagined crisp air, bird song, and that comforting smell of pine and damp earth after rain. Instead, the closer I got to the cabin, the narrower the roads became, until the GPS flat out gave up, blinking its little no signal warning and mocking me in silence. Switchbacks twisted like a roller coaster from hell, and my old sedan groaned over rocks that seemed almost deliberately placed to test my patience and my tires. Every mile I thought I'd left civilization behind. The isolation thickened, pressing in through the windows, seeping into my thoughts, whispering a warning I wasn't yet willing to hear. The cabin itself emerged suddenly, as if it had been hiding all along. Shadowed logs blackened with age, a sagging roof, a stone chimney leaning like it was about to surrender to gravity. No smoke rose from the chimney, no light flickered behind the shuttered windows. It wasn't a cozy getaway. It looked like it didn't want to be found. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening, and I reminded myself that I'd come here willingly. The job promised 6 months of peace and a paycheck large enough to make my rent, my bills, and even my pride disappear for a while. All I had to do was watch. Watch for smoke, watch the woods, and obey the rules. Strange, specific rules. Rules left behind by someone who might have been watching long before me. I parked, killed the engine, and let the silence settle over me. This was supposed to be liberation, the kind of isolation people pay for in retreats. But it felt more like the world had exhaled and left me in a vacuum where every sound I made was amplified. My own breathing sounded loud, almost mocking. The key was exactly where the instructions said it would be, under a rock shaped like a boot, just to the left of the porch steps. I lifted it, found the key cold and heavy in my palm, and hesitated for just a second, as if pausing would let me hear some hidden warning. Then I turned the deadbolt and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed, and the cabin hit me with a smell that was alive. Not mold, not decay, but the tang of coffee, wood smoke, and something sour that I couldn't place. Someone had been here. Someone had just left. Or maybe they hadn't left at all. My duffel thudded to the floor as I stepped inside, my eyes sweeping over the cast iron stove, the two-burner propane top, the wooden table, and the bed it shoved against the wall. A pair of boots sat by the door, laces crusted with mud. A coffee mug, half filled with old residue, sat like a small silent accusation. And there it was, the spiral notebook, pen resting in the gutter between the pages. My skin prickled. I picked up the pen, warm, as if someone had just held it. Impossible. The cabin had been empty for weeks. The job listing said so. Bill, my supervisor, had promised that. But the pen told a different story. I opened the notebook, scanning the cramped, uneven handwriting. Day 127. It learned my name. My heart thumped in my chest like it wanted to escape, and I flipped to the first page. Day 1, November 18th. The tone was careful, hopeful, mundane at first. Weather, deer tracks, crows. The kind of notes someone alone would write to keep sanity tethered. But the normalcy didn't last. By day 14, the entries shifted. Footsteps circling the cabin at night. Breaths I could hear. Heavy and wet. Without anyone there. Day 22. Voices calling out names only the writer's family knew. Voices that shouldn't exist outside memory or hallucination. The rules appeared tucked into the stove, wrapped in oilcloth. 7 of them, precise and unsettling. Follow them, the previous watcher had written. Follow exactly or pay the cost. My hands shook as I read them, one by one. And I realized the cabin wasn't just a job site. It was a stage, and I was the actor, the unwitting participant in a play that had been rehearsing without me. Day 31. The voices knew things they shouldn't. My mother's voice, though she had been gone for 14 years, singing the song she used to sing. Day 68. Sleep became impossible. Every night, knocks, static from the radio, stones moved and scattered around the cabin like some grotesque board game. Day 103. Glimpses through the trees of something impossibly tall, wrong, and watching. And then the final entry, day 127. It learned my name. The culmination of months of isolation, terror, and ritual. The notebook revealed that this wasn't randomness. Someone was orchestrating, observing, measuring. Every detail, every fear, every reaction had been anticipated, documented, and used. I sank into a chair, the notebook trembling in my hands, the mug and boots silently accusing me of not seeing the trap. My first night in the cabin had already become a chessboard where I was the pawn, the rules the edges of the board, the unseen hand manipulating the pieces. The forest pressed in, silent now, but I felt it watching, waiting for my first mistake. Outside, shadows lengthened with the setting sun, bleeding red through the trees, and I realized peace was gone, replaced with the quiet dread of compliance, with the terror of understanding too late that rules weren't protection, they were prison bars, and I was the prisoner. The sun disappeared behind the dense canopy. The knock came at 11:43 p.m. Three sharp measure taps on the cabin door. Rule 7. If someone knocks after dark, ask for their full name and employee number. But the voice was familiar, warm, coaxing. Bill, my supervisor, supposedly. But hesitation betrayed it. I repeated the question, and the voice faltered, unnatural. Panic rose in my throat like bile. The door shook under the measured pressure of knocks. Click went the Polaroid. Nothing. Only the door. The rules had kept me alive. They were designed to keep me predictable, compliant, observed. Each rule, a psychological tether, a cage disguised as guidance. Hours blurred into a restless vigil. Singing came from the east, harmonies too precise to be natural, hauntingly beautiful. Figures standing in a semicircle among the trees, singing. I clicked again. Polaroid. Trees, just trees. My mind screamed. The evidence denied me the truth my eyes swore existed. The forest had become a theater of manipulation, and I the subject, caught between obedience and understanding, terror and survival. I realized the horror wasn't just the unseen but the methodical, deliberate design to bend perception, to create belief, to engineer fear and compliance with every detail, every rule, every false touch of the supernatural. I checked the stones at dawn. 12 white stones circling the cabin. 11. Anxiety pressed against me, suffocating, until I replaced the missing stone from the bucket under the porch. Relief, compliance rewarded. I understood then. Every rule was part of the experiment. Every ritual a conditioning tool. And I was already inside, a participant before I even knew the game existed. The notebooks of previous watchers, Beth Calloway, James Reese, weren't fictional. They were data points, predecessors. The real warning I had been given but couldn't see. Their abrupt endings hinted at what would happen if the rules were broken. And I understood. Survival depended on obedience, patience, and careful observation. I sat back in the chair, staring at the notebooks, the Polaroid camera, the rules, and the cabin itself. What had seemed like isolation and escape was an intricate experiment stretching across months and victims. The forest, the shadows, the silence, all designed. And I, desperate for peace, had walked straight into the trap. But I was still here, awake, observing, calculating, and I swore, in that suffocating quiet, that understanding the rules would be my weapon. They weren't protection. They were the key to survival. Follow them exactly, for the first night was just the beginning. The second night fell heavier than the first. Even with the first night terror behind me, my muscles never relaxed. My mind never stopped listening. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the pine needles felt like it carried intention. I had memorized the 7 rules, repeated them under my breath until they burned into my memory. Rule 1: never leave the cabin without checking for footprints. Rule 2: always lock doors twice. Rule 3: respond to knocks with full names and employee numbers. Rule 4: never look into the woods after midnight. Rule 5: do not photograph or film anything outside after dark. Rule 6: if you hear singing, do not move. Rule 7: if a visitor appears, question them thoroughly. Obedience was survival, and yet every rule felt like a double-edged sword, a chain keeping me tethered to fear. I sat by the stove, notebook open, pen ready, trying to mimic the meticulous recordings of previous watchers. The first day's routine was mundane: checking the woodpile, measuring the water level in the rain barrel, noting the weather, counting the deer tracks outside. But I couldn't ignore the shadows. They shifted unnaturally, just at the edge of vision. At first, I convinced myself it was exhaustion, the trick of isolation playing with my senses. But when a branch snapped 20 feet from the cabin, I froze. No breeze, no animals visible, just the snap, sharp, deliberate. My fingers tightened around the pen, paper trembling under my grip. The night outside this cabin was a heavy breathing thing. Shadows slithered across the walls, and every creak of the old timber sounded like a footstep, deliberate and patient. I couldn't sleep, though I tried, lying on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the knots in the wooden planks. The rules echoed in my mind, looping like a dark mantra. Never leave the cabin between sunset and sunrise. Count the steps to the outhouse. Never respond to voices that aren't mine. Each one was absurd on its own, but together they formed a map I had to navigate carefully or risk something I couldn't name. Hours dragged. I kept my flashlight nearby, the soft hum of the battery a lonely reassurance. I tried to distract myself, reading Elias Moss's journal again, tracing the cramped, desperate handwriting. Every entry was a pulse of fear, each page a mirror reflecting what I might become. Day 127, it learned my name. The words hammered into my chest. That simple sentence carried weight. A threat folded into ink. It was an announcement, a claim that someone or something was watching, knowing, anticipating every reaction. I could feel it in the air, pressing down, subtle but undeniable. A noise broke the monotony of silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It came from outside the cabin, low at first, almost like rain, but too precise, too patterned. My stomach dropped. I forced my breathing to slow, reminding myself of the rules. Rule 7. If someone knocks after dark, ask for their full name and employee number. Hesitate, and they're not who they say they are. The rational part of me screamed to ignore it. But the other part, the part that had felt the oppressive weight of isolation creeping into my mind, told me to listen, to observe, to measure. I moved slowly to the window, careful not to let my shadow betray me. Through the glass, I saw only the silhouette of the trees. Their long branches swayed slightly in the wind. Or was it something else? My hands shook as I retrieved the Polaroid camera. The familiar click of its mechanism grounding me. Click. Where? The photo slid out, developing like a scene in slow motion. Trees. Only trees. Dark, quiet, waiting. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. I sat back down, heart hammering, and forced myself to think. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run east toward the cave, toward the unknown, toward whatever truth lay behind this nightmare. But the rules anchored me, and in that anchoring was safety. Or so I told myself. The candle flickered on the table, shadows dancing across the journals, the list of names, and the rules themselves. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just rules. They were a trap, a behavioral cage designed to manipulate, control, and bend me into predictability. I tried to sleep again, eyelids heavy, but the darkness outside felt alive. A faint whisper drifted through the cracked window. My name. Not in anger, not in menace, but soft, intimate, like someone had reached across time to touch me. I stiffened, recalling the journal entry where Elias had heard voices that knew his family's secrets. My mother's song, my brother's nickname. It was impossible, and yet here it was. The forest had learned my name, or perhaps someone had taught it to the forest. Hours blurred. I watched the shadows lengthen and contract, as if breathing with the cabin itself. Every sound became meaningful. The creak of a hinge, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. I counted the white stones again, carefully, methodically, ensuring that the perimeter remained intact. One by one, I replaced them in precise intervals. Each stone felt like a talisman, a ward against something I didn't understand. Relief washed over me briefly when the 12th stone clicked into place, but it was fleeting. The weight returned, heavier this time, pressing against my ribs, making every breath a struggle. When dawn finally crept across the sky, gray and hesitant, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I had survived the night, yes, but the night had survived me as well. It had left traces, invisible scars, suggestions of presence that no sunlight could erase. I packed my bag carefully, keeping the journals, Polaroids, and my flashlight close. I needed to prepare for the day ahead. The rules would guide me, yes, but I could feel their limitations tightening, like a noose just out of reach. I had to understand the boundaries before they became absolute. By mid-morning, I ventured outside, following the perimeter once more. The forest was deceptive in daylight. Shadows retreated, colors returned, birds began to sing. Yet the air was thick, heavy with secrets. The soil smelled damp, earthy, almost like iron. Something had been here while I slept. I could feel it in the way the moss clung to the trees, in the slight disturbance of fallen leaves, in the precise placement of a branch that hadn't been there the night before. My eyes scanned every tree line, every shadow, every flicker of movement. I had to be vigilant. As I filled my water bottle from the spring, I felt it, the first real brush of presence. Not voices, not whispers, but the subtle shift in atmosphere that comes when something intelligent observes. I froze. The rules had prepared me for this. Yes. Step back. Count. Return to cabin immediately if anything is amiss. But every fiber of me wanted to challenge it, to step beyond, to see. I took a careful sip and scanned the perimeter again. Nothing. Only the gentle ripple of the water and the soft rustle of the leaves. Still, the sensation lingered, a warning etched into the air itself. Back inside the cabin, I tried to organize my thoughts. The journals told a story, yes, but it was fragmented, inconsistent, deeply disturbing. Elias, Beth, James, each had experienced similar phenomena. Each had followed the rules. Each had ultimately been consumed in one way or another by the system. And now it was my turn. The rules weren't protection. They were conditioning. A psychological experiment dressed as survival. My every action, my every thought, my every reaction was under observation, and somewhere in the forest, someone or multiple someones was taking notes. I reviewed the rules once more, reading them aloud as if by speaking them, I could reinforce their authority, their necessity. Rule 1: never leave between sunset and sunrise. Rule 2: use the Polaroid camera to document voices. Rule 3: maintain the 12 white stones around the cabin. Rule 4: respect the radio hours. Rule 5: log distant smoke but ignore perfect vertical columns. Rule 6: collect water only during specified hours. Rule 7: identify visitors by full name and employee number. 7 rules, 7 constraints, each a thread in a web that ensnared me completely. By afternoon, I realized the depth of what I had stumbled into. This was more than isolation, more than strange rules or a haunted cabin. It was St. Cheese. It's a controlled, meticulous experiment on the human psyche. Every sound, every visual cue, every temporal distortion, all calculated to test compliance, to measure fear, to manipulate belief. The forest itself was a laboratory. The journals, the rules, the Polaroids, all instruments of conditioning. And I was the subject, navigating a reality that wasn't quite real, yet had tangible consequences. Hours passed. I performed the perimeter check again, meticulously, counting each stone, replacing any that had moved. The tapping returned briefly at dusk. Soft, measured. I resisted the urge to react, following the rules, photographing only trees. The forest seemed to respond, withdrawing, the oppressive weight lightening fractionally. Compliance brought relief, but also unease. The rules were a double-edged sword, offering safety while reinforcing dependence, conditioning my instincts to trust patterns over intuition, obedience over survival. By nightfall, I had settled near the stove, organizing my notes, documenting observations, and preparing mentally for the hours to come. Sleep was impossible, replaced by a hyper-awareness that left me on edge. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every flicker of shadow was magnified, analyzed, catalogued. The Polaroid camera sat ready, a small talisman against the incomprehensible. I could not leave, could not ignore, could not break the rules without consequence. And yet, an insistent part of me wondered, what if the rules were exactly what I should break? The forest outside grew darker, more opaque, as if swallowing the light. A single crow cawed, the sound startling in the sudden stillness. I checked the perimeter once more. 12 stones in place, every measurement precise. The tapping resumed, slower this time, deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing through the trees. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, observe, document, comply. And as the night stretched on, as shadows pooled in the corners of the cabin, I realized that the true test wasn't surviving the rules. It was surviving myself, my own mind, in a place designed to unravel both. The second night in the cabin brought with it a new level of intensity. I had grown accustomed to the way the darkness felt, how it crept along the walls and pooled in the corners like liquid ink. But familiarity did little to diminish the fear. The forest was no longer just outside. It had insinuated itself into my very thoughts, making every imagined sound a potential threat. I could hear the wind in the pines, yes, but underneath there was something else. A soft, deliberate scratching, moving in patterns I could not recognize. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, prickling like static electricity. I clutched the Polaroid camera, knowing instinctively that it was more than a tool. It was my only anchor. Elias Moss had emphasized in his journal that documenting the phenomena could keep them at bay, or at least give the illusion of control. The previous night's photo had shown nothing but trees, yet even that small validation gave me a sliver of courage. Courage, however, is a fragile thing in the Appalachia wilds when the forest itself seems to breathe and watch. I reviewed the rules silently. Never leave between sunset and sunrise. Maintain the 12 stones. Always photograph and record the inexplicable. They were not suggestions. They were lifelines. Lifelines whose significance I was only beginning to understand. Hours into the night, I noticed a faint glow near the tree line. At first, I dismissed it as fireflies. Their bioluminescent dance, a harmless marvel of nature. But then the glow shifted, moving with deliberate intent, not random movement. My pulse quickened. I considered leaving the cabin to approach the light, but the rules forbade it. Rule 1. Obedience meant survival. Every fiber of my being screamed against compliance. But the forest had already demonstrated its cruelty to those who ignored the rules. I grabbed the camera and stepped to the window, snapping a photo in the direction of the glow. Click. The image developed, an unbroken darkness. The glow was gone. Had it been real? Or was my mind trying to taunt me with its imagination? The forest, in that moment, seemed to pulse with malevolence. Shadows shifted across the walls in patterns that almost resembled figures. I could swear I saw someone standing just beyond the tree line, watching me. I froze, unsure if my own fear had conjured a phantom or if the forest itself was playing with my perception. I returned to the center of the cabin, checking each stone carefully. 12 stones in precise formation, untouched yet vital. One had shifted slightly. My stomach dropped. A mistake or a warning. I repositioned it with trembling fingers, whispering an apology, though I had no idea to whom. Sleep, if it could be called that, was fitful. Every noise became a narrative, every creak a story. I dreamed of trees with human faces, faces that whispered my name, beckoning me into their roots. I woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, and noticed that the candle had burned lower than it should have. Though I had not touched it, I considered the possibilities. A draft, my imagination, or some unseen entity manipulating time, space, and light within these walls. The rules never mentioned the candle, but perhaps everything else was contingent on it. Perhaps survival was less about adherence and more about perception, an endless trial of mind over reality. By dawn, I had catalogued every sound, shadow, and sensation from the night. The glow had returned at first light, this time static, suspended near the eastern tree line. I approached the cabin's window cautiously, peering through the glass. The light revealed something impossible. A circle of stones surrounding a small mound of dirt, freshly disturbed. My breath caught in my throat. Had someone or something entered my perimeter while I slept? Or had the forest itself shifted, marking a new boundary, a new rule, unspoken but inevitable? I took another Polaroid photograph. The picture revealed a dark shape at the center of the mound. I did not dare approach it. Instead, I focused on the journal, trying to make sense of Elias's fragmented entries. Day 144. It knows what you fear, then turns it into the environment. The stones protect you, but only if you believe in them. Do not doubt. My hand shook as I read. The handwriting jagged and hurried. Belief was a strange kind of weapon. The journal suggested survival was as much about faith in the rules as about the rules themselves. Yet, the ambiguity gnawed at me. If belief shaped reality, what happened When doubt crept in, what if my skepticism triggered the forest's wrath? I forced myself to compartmentalize fear, transforming it into methodical observation and rigid adherence to the rules. Midday arrived with oppressive humidity. I took the opportunity to collect water, strictly within the hours dictated by the rules. The spring gurgled with an unsettling clarity, reflecting the canopy above in fractured patterns. Every ripple seemed deliberate, as if even the water were monitoring me. I paused, hand hovering above the surface, considering the implications. Rule 6 was clear, yet every instinct urged me to rush, to ignore the timing, to seize what seemed safe. Compliance, I reminded myself, was survival. The water, once collected, was stored in my designated containers, each labeled carefully. Not a drop could be wasted, not a misstep allowed. By evening, a new phenomenon emerged. I heard faint chanting, low and rhythmic, carried through the dense woods. It was not in a language I recognized, yet somehow I understood it, felt it as a vibration in my chest. The chanting rose and fell, weaving through the trees, bending the very air. My rational mind sought explanations, perhaps distant hikers, perhaps animals, perhaps echoes. But the sensation was intimate, deliberate, targeted. It was calling me, challenging me, daring me to step beyond the rules, to prove my courage, or perhaps to seal my fate. I prepared the cabin for the night once more, positioning the 12 stones, arranging the Polaroid camera, lighting the candle in the center of the room. Shadows clung to the walls, eager and expectant. The whispering wind carried fragments of sound, broken phrases I could almost understand. My heart raced. Rule 3. Maintain the stones. Rule 7. Identify visitors. Rule 1. Never leave. Every rule now felt like a lifeline and a noose simultaneously. The forest, I realized, had evolved. It no longer merely observed. It interacted, manipulated, and tested my adherence in real time. The first knock came just after dusk. 3 sharp, deliberate raps on the cabin door. My body froze. The Polaroid camera hovered in my hands. The knocking continued, then stopped, as though someone had anticipated my reaction. I forced myself to recall the rules, ask for their full name, employee number, hesitate. I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "Who's there?" I asked cautiously, keeping the camera aimed at the door. Silence, then a voice, soft, unfamiliar, almost melodic. Do you believe in the rules? My blood ran cold. It was not a simple question, it was a challenge. I hesitated, following the protocol as best I could. State your name and identification, I said. The voice laughed, low and fluid, like the rustling of leaves. Names are meaningless here. Identification is a concept of the old world. Only compliance matters. The door handle rattled, though I did not move. Fear surged through me like a tidal wave. Rule 1, Rule 7. I clung to them desperately. My mind raced. If I opened the door, I risked everything. If I didn't, I risked drawing attention. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, calculating, waiting for my next move. Hours passed. The voice receded, leaving only a whisper carried on the wind. The candle flickered. Shadows danced more aggressively, and I realized that I had survived the second night by adherence and instinct. But the forest had changed. It was no longer a passive observer. It had tested me, probing my reactions, shaping my fears. And I, trapped within the wooden walls, the 12 stones, the journals, and the Polaroid camera, understood that survival would demand more than obedience. It would require ingenuity, courage, and the fragile balance between belief and doubt. The third night fell heavier than the first two, pressing down with the weight of expectation. I could feel it in my bones. The forest was waiting, patient and meticulous. The wind carried its secrets, each gust a reminder that I was no longer just a visitor in Appalachia. I was a participant in its hidden game. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, subtle movements that suggested intent, intelligence, and patience far beyond human comprehension. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was sharper than ever. I knew that survival depended not just on following the rules, but on understanding them, anticipating their purpose. I began the evening by checking the 12 stones, my hands trembling from both fear and anticipation. Each stone had its place, and each place was sacred. The first stone, nearest the entrance, had a small chip I hadn't noticed before. A sign of negligence or a warning? I repositioned it carefully, murmuring apologies aloud. Perhaps the forest could hear my words. Perhaps it didn't care. I lit the candle at the center, its flame dancing wildly in the draught, casting flickering shadows that seemed to mimic figures. I positioned the Polaroid camera to face the window, recording everything outside. Tonight, I would not be passive. Tonight, I would observe, document, and anticipate. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant snapping of twigs. Then, unmistakably, a figure appeared. At first, it was merely a silhouette against the deepening darkness, a shape humanoid, yet wrong, elongated, with movements too fluid, too deliberate to be human. My heart raced as I grabbed the camera, snapping a photo. Click. The image developed, revealing nothing but blackness. The figure had vanished, or perhaps it had never been captured by the camera. My pulse throbbed in my ears, but I refused to move from my position. Rule 1. Never leave. Rule 7. Identify visitors. I was following the protocol. The forest would judge me for hesitation, not action. Then came the whispers. They were closer than ever, circling the cabin like a predator stalking prey. Low, melodic, unintelligible, yet somehow coherent. My instincts screamed to flee, but every muscle was frozen in obedience. I repeated the rules aloud, as if vocalizing them would reinforce their power. Maintain the stones. Never leave between sunset and sunrise. Record and document everything. The whispering paused, then seemed to respond, the cadence of the voice bending around my words, twisting them into questions. Do you understand? Or do you fear? Fear, I realized, was the tool. The forest could manipulate it, shape it, and use it against me. Survival required acknowledgement, not suppression. I breathed deeply, steadying my thoughts. I moved next to the eastern window, where the mound had appeared the previous day. The glow was back, faint and wavering, like candlelight filtered through fog. I approached slowly, camera in hand, documenting every inch. There, at the center of the mound, lay a small object, a carved figurine, wooden and delicate, yet undeniably ancient. Its features were almost human, yet wrong. Too elongated, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in an impossible smile. I recognized it immediately as a token, a symbol. Elias Moss had written of these in his journal, mentioning them as gifts or tests. I wasn't sure which. I lifted it carefully, feeling an almost electric pulse of energy. The forest seemed to breathe around me, watching my interaction, gauging my reaction. Night deepened, and the cabin seemed to shrink under the weight of unseen eyes. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind, every flicker of candlelight became magnified. I moved with deliberate care, documenting, observing, and adjusting the stones when necessary. Rule 3, Rule 5. Each rule intertwined with instinct, belief, and fear. I began to understand that survival was a ritual, a choreography of awareness, obedience, and perception. Any deviation could be fatal. The forest had shown me this repeatedly. Even a minor mistake could invite consequences beyond comprehension. Then, without warning, a sound unlike any before penetrated the cabin. A low, resonant hum vibrating through the walls, the floor, even the air itself. It was harmonious, yet alien, beautiful and terrifying. My hands shook, and my eyes darted toward the window. The glow intensified, revealing more figures, or perhaps reflections, illusions conjured by the forest. They moved in synchrony, circling the mound, circling me. The air thickened, heavy and tactile, pressing against my skin. I realized with dawning horror that the forest was not passive observation. It was interaction, a sentient force that tested my every move, my every thought. I sank to the floor, clutching the journal and the figurine, whispering Elias's words like prayers. It knows what you fear, then turns it into the environment. The stones protect you, but only if you believe in them. Do not doubt. Belief, obedience, survival. I began to recite every rule, every note, every caution I had learned. I felt the presence of the forest, its awareness, responding. The shadows on the walls no longer seemed hostile. They were measuring, learning, adapting. I had passed some test, though I could not yet understand its parameters. Hours later, after the hum had faded and the figures dissolved into darkness, I realized something profound. I had survived, not through bravery alone, not through luck, but through a delicate balance of compliance, awareness, and belief. The forest had allowed me passage through another night, a tacit acknowledgement of my understanding. I recorded this in the journal, taking meticulous notes, photographing the cabin, the stones, and the remnants of the mound. Documentation, I realized, was not just survival. It was proof, an anchor to reality in a place where reality itself was fluid. Dawn arrived, weak and pale, filtering through the canopy like hesitant eyes. The forest, ever watchful, seemed to exhale, as if granting me a reprieve. I stepped outside cautiously, examining the mound. The figurine remained unchanged, yet now it carried a different weight, a symbol of endurance, of recognition. I rearranged the stones once more, ensuring they were perfectly aligned. Every action was deliberate, every gesture intentional. The forest was patient, but it was precise. Mistakes, I knew, would not be forgiven. By mid-morning, I had collected water, gathered supplies, and documented every minute detail. My exhaustion was total, yet my senses were heightened. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of leaves, every shifting shadow carried meaning. I understood now that the rules were not arbitrary. They were the language of survival in this sentient wilderness. Each stone, each candle, each photograph was a syllable, a word, a sentence in the ongoing dialogue between human and forest. Compliance was conversation, observation was understanding, belief was power. The third night had taught me more than fear. It had taught me resilience. I realized that the forest's rules were not merely restrictions, but tools, frameworks for existing within an intelligence far older and more intricate than I could comprehend. The line between reality and imagination had blurred, yet clarity had emerged through adherence. I documented everything, knowing that tomorrow would demand more, that the forest would continue to test, manipulate, and measure. But I was ready. I had learned its language, and in that, I found the faintest glimmer of control. As I prepared for the final night, I arranged the stones, positioned the Polaroid camera, and lit the candle. Shadows stretched along the walls, long and serpentine, as if acknowledging my progress. I whispered the rules aloud, feeling their resonance within me. The forest listened, as it always had, as it always would. And I, a solitary traveler in Appalachia, understood that survival was not about conquest or escape. It was about harmony, attention, and unwavering faith in a set of ancient, impossible, yet vital rules. The night descended once more, and I watched, waited, and documented. The glow returned, softer now, almost conciliatory. Figures moved through the trees, deliberate but non-threatening. The air vibrated with an almost musical quality, as if celebrating my endurance. I felt an understanding settle within me, a quiet recognition that I had passed through something profoundly alien yet fundamentally logical. The forest was no longer just a threat. It was a teacher, a mirror, a presence demanding respect and attention. I survived because I listened, because I believed, because I obeyed. By sunrise, I packed my belongings carefully, ensuring every stone, every note, every photograph was accounted for. The forest had tested me, shaped me, and allowed me to leave with understanding intact. I took one final photograph of the cabin, the mound, and the 12 stones perfectly aligned. The camera clicked, and the image revealed clarity for the first time. The forest, the shadows, the figures, all present, all observing, yet all contained within the frame of survival. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the experience settle into my bones. I had entered the forest as a visitor, naive and unprepared. I left as a survivor, cautious but empowered, bound forever to the strange, intricate rules of Appalachia.